A billionaire CEO's life takes an unexpected turn when, during a company charity event at the local homeless shelter, he encounters his ex-wife holding her baby in her arms. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Robert Anderson's penthouse office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk. At 42, he had everything money could buy: a billion-dollar empire, Manhattan's most prestigious address, and a reputation as one of Wall Street's most ruthless CEOs. Yet something felt hollow in his carefully curated world. The shelter visit is scheduled for 2 p.m., so his assistant reminded him, sliding a folder across the desk. The press will be there. Robert suppressed a sigh. Another Puerto Rico opportunity, another chance to show the world how philanthropic the mighty Anderson Corp could be. He straightened his brioni tie, more out of habit than necessity, when his world suddenly tilted on its axis. There she stood in the shelter's dim light, Lila, his ex-wife of barely a year, her auburn hair dulled and pulled back in a messy braid, wearing worn jeans instead of the designer dresses he remembered. But it wasn't her presence that stopped his heart. It was the tiny bundle in her arms, no more than 6 months old, with eyes that mirrored his own. The baby's tiny fist clutched at Lila's threadbare sweater as she turned, meeting his gaze with a mix of defiance and fear that would haunt him forever. In that moment, Robert Anderson, the man who controlled billions with a single signature, felt utterly powerless. The questions exploded in his mind. Was this his child? Why was Lila here? What had he missed in his relentless pursuit of power? But the most terrifying question was the one he couldn't voice. What kind of man had he become? The Anderson corporate tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a silver needle, its 90 floors of gleaming glass and steel a testament to Robert Anderson's relentless ambition. From his penthouse office on the top floor, he commanded an empire worth billions, built through strategic acquisitions and ruthless determination over the past 15 years. Robert adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a habit he'd developed during countless high-stakes negotiations. The morning sun caught their polished surface, reminding him of another pair, the ones Lila had given him on their first anniversary. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the spreadsheets before him. "Mr. Anderson, the board is waiting." James Parker, his CFO and oldest friend, announced from the doorway. "They're concerned about the Morgan acquisition." The boardroom fell silent as Robert entered. 12 faces turned toward him, a mix of anticipation and carefully concealed fear. He'd earned that fear, built his reputation on it. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had become his trademark. "The numbers speak for themselves." 2 hours later, Robert stood victorious. Another company acquired, another billion added to the Anderson portfolio. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, emptiness echoed through his chest as he stared out at the city below. His assistant, Patricia, interrupted his thoughts. "Your mother is on line 1. She's asking about the Winters Foundation Gala next week." Robert grimaced. Eleanor Anderson had been pushing him to reconnect with Caroline Winters, a suitable match in his mother's eyes. "Tell her I'll call back." The day unfolded like countless others before it: meetings, calls, decisions that would affect thousands of lives. Robert moved through them with mechanical precision, his mind unexpectedly drifting to the shelter visit scheduled for that afternoon. Another Puerto Rico exercise, his team had said. Show the human side of Anderson Corp. His office walls were lined with awards and accolades: Business Leader of the Year, Corporate Visionary, 40 under 40, a shrine to success that felt increasingly hollow. The photo on his desk caught his eye, the only personal item in the sterile space. It showed a younger version of himself with Lila at the Hampton house, both laughing at some forgotten joke. He'd meant to remove it after the divorce, but somehow never had. The quarterly reports are in, James announced, dropping a thick folder on his desk. Profits up 20%. The board will be pleased. Robert nodded absently, his fingers tracing the edge of the photo frame. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it, James? All of this?" His friend paused, studying him with concern. "You built this empire from nothing, Robert. Your father would be proud." But would he? Richard Anderson had built his modest construction company with handshakes and personal relationships. Robert had transformed it into a corporate giant through calculated moves and leveraged buyouts. His father had known every employee's name. Robert barely knew his executive team. The intercom buzzed. "Your car is ready, sir. The press is already gathering at the shelter." But Robert stood, straightening his tie in the reflection of the window. The man staring back at him looked successful, powerful, untouchable. So why did he suddenly feel like a stranger in his own skin? "One more thing," James called as Robert reached the door. "Eleanor asked me to remind you about dinner tonight. The Winters will be there." Robert's jaw tightened. His mother's attempts at matchmaking had become increasingly transparent since the divorce. "Cancel it. Tell her something came up." As the elevator descended, Robert caught fragments of his reflection in the polished doors. At 42, he was in his prime, wealthy, powerful, respected. He had everything his younger self had dreamed of. Everything except the one thing money couldn't buy someone to share it with. The thought caught him off guard, much like the empty echo of his footsteps across the marble lobby. Success had been his mistress for so long, he'd forgotten how to want anything else. But as his driver held open the car door, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed world was about to shatter. The St. Mary's Community Shelter stood in stark contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers just 10 blocks away. Lila Mitchell adjusted Mia in her arms as she walked through the worn hallways, the baby's soft weight both a comfort and a reminder of how far she'd fallen from her former life. "Good morning, dear," called Martha Watson, the elderly resident who had become Lila's surrogate mother over the past 3 months. The old woman's weathered face creased with concern. "Did you get any sleep? I heard Mia fussing last night." Lila managed a tired smile. "She's teething. But we managed she didn't mention the hours spent pacing the small room they shared, trying to soothe Mia while worrying about the dwindling supply of diapers and formula." The shelter's common room buzzed with morning activity. Women gathered around the dated coffee maker, sharing stories and advice. Children darted between tables, their laughter a counterpoint to the serious discussions of job searches and apartment applications. This wasn't the life Lila had imagined when she graduated from Columbia with honors, or when she married Robert Anderson in St. Patrick's Cathedral. Sarah Cooper, the shelter's director, approached with a stack of papers. "I've got some job leads for you, Lila. A few receptionist positions, nothing fancy, but they're okay with flexible hours." She hesitated. "Have you considered reaching out to?" No, Lila cut her off firmly, where managing fine pride was all she had left, and she clung to it fiercely. Later, in the small room she shared with Mia, Lila pulled out her last remaining luxury, a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with letters she'd never send. "Dear Robert," today's entry began. Mia smiled for the first time yesterday. "She has your eyes." The sound of high heels clicking down the hallway made her hastily hide the journal. Andrea from Social Services appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Mitchell, we need to discuss your housing situation. 3 months is the usual limit for temporary residents." Lila's heart raced. "I'm looking for work. I just need a little more time." She didn't mention the 3 interviews she'd had last week, all ending with polite rejections when they learned she had a newborn and no childcare. "There's a women's shelter in Queens," Andrea suggested gently. "They might have space." "We'll figure something out," Lila interrupted, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Queens meant leaving the only support system she'd found, the makeshift family that had embraced her when her own world crumbled. That evening, as she fed Mia her bottle, Lila caught her reflection in the streaked window. At 35, she still had the graceful features that had once graced charity galas and corporate events. But her designer wardrobe had been sold piece by piece to pay for prenatal care, and her carefully maintained highlights had grown out to reveal strands of grey. Martha appeared with a bowl of soup and day-old bread from the shelter's kitchen. "You need to eat, child, for both of you." Lila blinked back tears at the kindness. "I had it all planned out, Martha. I was going to tell him about the baby, give our marriage another chance." But then she trailed off, remembering the countless calls blocked, the letters returned unopened. "Life has a way of unraveling our plans," Martha said wisely, stroking Mia's downy head. "But sometimes what unravels leads us where we need to be." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Sarah appeared, looking flustered. "They're coming tomorrow, Anderson Corp. Some big PR event." She gave Lila an apologetic look. "I couldn't say no. The funding." Lila's heart stopped. After months of careful avoidance, her past and present were about to collide. She held Mia closer, the baby's warmth anchoring her to reality. "It's okay," she assured Sarah, though her voice trembled. "We'll stay in our room." But as she prepared for bed that night, Lila wondered if fate had finally caught up with her. Tomorrow, the carefully constructed walls between her old life and new would crumble. The question was, would she survive the fall? St. Mary's Community Shelter was more than just a transitional housing facility. It was a tapestry of lives interwoven by circumstance and survival. Sarah Cooper had run the shelter for 15 years, her once blonde hair now streaked with grey, her compassionate eyes carrying the weight of countless stories. "We're a family here," Sarah often said during the weekly community meetings, and it was true. Each resident brought their own story, their own strength to the collective whole. There was Martha Watson, 72, who had lost everything to medical bills after her husband's death. Now she was the shelter's unofficial grandmother, dispensing wisdom and fresh-baked cookies with equal generosity. Jessica Torres, a former nurse with 2 young boys, ran the shelter's small medical station. She had fled an abusive marriage with nothing but her children and her medical knowledge. Now she checked residents' blood pressure, bandaged scraped knees, and offered professional advice that many couldn't afford otherwise. "Your little one's doing fine," Jessica assured Lila during Mia's weekly checkup. "Growing strong, just like her mama." The words carried extra weight coming from someone who understood the struggle of single motherhood. The shelter's youngest resident was Emma Bennett, barely 19, pregnant and scared. Lila had taken her under her wing, sharing baby clothes she'd managed to save and offering the kind of guidance she wished she'd had. "You're stronger than you know," she told Emma during their late-night talks in the common room. Tom Richardson, the elderly maintenance man, kept the aging building running through sheer determination and creative problem-solving. His toolbox was as much a part of the shelter as the worn furniture, and his quiet humming could often be heard echoing through the halls as he fixed another leaky faucet or sticky door. The evening community dinners were where the shelter truly came alive. Women from different backgrounds shared recipes and stories around the long tables. Children did homework together while their mothers discussed job leads and apartment hunts. The air filled with a mix of languages and laughter, the aroma of different cultural dishes creating a warmth that went beyond mere sustenance. "We don't just feed bodies here," Martha would say, stirring her famous soup. "We feed souls." Her words rang true every time a new resident arrived, shell-shocked and wary, only to find themselves embraced by this makeshift family. The shelter's small library, really just 3 bookcases in a corner, was maintained by Claire Wilson, a former school teacher who organized reading sessions for the children. "Books are windows," she'd tell them, "and windows can lead to doors." When word spread about Anderson Corp's upcoming visit, the community rallied around Lila. "We'll keep you and Mia safe," Sarah promised, organizing a schedule to ensure Lila wouldn't have to face Robert alone. Even Tom offered to accidentally block certain hallways with his repair work. The residents understood what outsiders often missed, that their strength lay not in what they'd lost, but in what they'd found in each other. They were more than their circumstances, more than their struggles. They were survivors, dreamers, fighters. As night fell over the shelter, the sounds of life continued: children's laughter, quiet conversations, the clinking of dishes being washed. In her small room, Lila listened to these familiar sounds, drawing comfort from them. Tomorrow might bring chaos, but tonight she was surrounded by a different kind of wealth, the riches of community, understanding and unconditional support. Robert Anderson sat in his dimly lit study at midnight, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his troubled features. The Puerto Rico event at the shelter had shaken him more than he cared to admit. The image of Lila holding that baby, his baby, haunted his every waking moment. "Michael," he spoke into his phone, "I need everything you can find on Lila Mitchell's whereabouts for the past year." Be discreet. Michael Stevens had been his private investigator for a decade, handling delicate matters with unwavering discretion. The days passed in a blur of meetings and sleepless nights. The preliminary report arrived in a plain manila envelope. Robert's hands trembled slightly as he read hospital visits, job applications, shelter records. Each page painted a picture that made his chest tighten with guilt and confusion. "She tried to contact you," James Parker said quietly, placing an old stack of letters on Robert's desk. "Patricia kept them from reaching you." His CFO and friend looked uncomfortable. "She said she was following Eleanor's orders." Robert's world tilted. His own mother had intercepted Lila's attempts to reach him. He spread the letters across his desk, their dates spanning the months following their divorce. The paper was thick, expensive, the last remnants of Lila's former life. "There's more." James hesitated. "The timing. If the baby is 6 months old, it means—" "She was pregnant when we divorced," Robert finished, his voice hollow. He remembered their last fight, the harsh words exchanged. Had she known then? Had she tried to tell him? The investigation deepened. Medical records showed Lila had experienced complications during pregnancy, requiring specialized care she could barely afford. Credit card statements revealed a gradual selling off of her possessions: designer clothes, jewelry, even her wedding ring to pay for prenatal care. She started at Simpson Brooks law firm after the divorce, Michael reported. Good position, promising career. Then she was let go when her pregnancy became visible. Wrongful termination, but she couldn't afford to fight it. Robert's anger grew with each revelation. How had he not known? How had he let this happen? The answer lay in his own ruthless focus on success, his ability to compartmentalize emotions until they ceased to exist. He drove past the shelter at night, watching the lights in the windows, wondering which one was hers. Security cameras showed her daily routine: early mornings with the baby, job hunting, helping other residents. She'd built a life without him, but at what cost? The baby's birth certificate, Michael said, delivering the final piece. Father's name is listed as undisclosed, but the timing matches. Blood type, physical characteristics, it all fits. Robert stared at the certificate. Mia Grace Mitchell, born 6 months ago at Manhattan General. His daughter. The word felt foreign yet impossibly right. "What do you want me to do next?" Michael asked. Robert closed the file, his decision made. "Nothing. I'm done investigating. It's time to face this directly." But as he prepared to confront Lila, another report landed on his desk. This one detailed his mother's involvement, the systematic blocking of Lila's communications, the carefully planted rumors about gold digging, the pressure applied to keep her isolated. Eleanor was protecting the company's interests, Patricia admitted when confronted. She said a pregnancy scandal would tank the Morgan merger. Robert's world, built on power and control, was crumbling. Every fact uncovered revealed another layer of deception, another failure on his part. The mighty CEO couldn't even protect the woman he'd once loved. That night, standing in Mia's newly furnished nursery, in his penthouse, a room filled with hope and possibilities, Robert made a vow. No more investigations, no more distance. It was time to step into the mess he'd helped create and try to make it right. As dawn broke over the city, he made one final call, not to his investigator, but to Sarah Cooper at the shelter. "I need to talk to Lila," he said simply. Not as a CEO, not as an ex-husband, but as a father who's ready to listen. The morning sun cast long shadows through St. Mary's windows as Lila paced the common room, Mia sleeping peacefully in her carrier. Sarah had just delivered Robert's message, and Lila's mind raced with 1,000 conflicting emotions. "He wants to talk," Sarah said gently. "Maybe it's time." Lila shook her head, memories flooding back. "You don't understand. I tried talking. For months, I tried." Her voice cracked with remembered pain. "Every call blocked, every letter returned. When I went to his office, security escorted me out like a criminal." The first meeting was set in the shelter's small conference room. Robert arrived early, his expensive suit out of place among the worn furniture. Lila entered with Mia, her posture defensive, ready for battle. "You look well," he started awkwardly. "Let's not pretend this is a social call." Lila cut him off. "Why are you really here, Robert?" The conversation deteriorated quickly. Every attempt at explanation met with years of built-up resentment. When Robert mentioned financial support, Lila's eyes flashed with anger. "Now you want to help? Where were you when I was selling my wedding ring to pay for prenatal vitamins? When I was sleeping in my car because no one would rent to a pregnant woman without a job?" "I didn't know," Robert insisted, his frustration mounting. "If you had told me." "I tried." Lila's voice rose, causing Mia to stir. "I called, I wrote, I begged your secretary just to give you a message. Don't you dare put this on me." Martha appeared at the door, concern etched on her face. "Everything all right, dear?" "We're fine," Lila assured her, but her hands trembled as she soothed Mia. The second meeting went no better. Robert brought documentation showing his mother's interference, but it only sparked fresh pain. "So your mother thought I was a gold digger?" Lila laughed bitterly. "And you? What did you think when I disappeared? Did you even wonder?" Robert's silence was damning. He had been too consumed with the Morgan merger, too focused on building his empire to question her absence. Their attempts at communication became a dance of misunderstandings. Robert's corporate approach to problem-solving clashed with Lila's protective instincts. Every offer of help felt like an accusation of failure to her. Every rejection felt like a personal attack to him. "I have a right to know my daughter," he insisted during their third meeting. "Rights." Lila's voice was quiet but sharp. "Rights are earned, Robert. They come with responsibility, with being present, with choosing family over power." The shelter residents watched these encounters with concern. They had seen Lila build herself back up from nothing, had witnessed her strength and determination. Now they watched her struggle with old wounds reopened. "Sometimes the hardest words to say are the ones that matter most," Martha advised one evening, watching Lila rock a fussy Mia. But how do you bridge a gap built of pride, pain, and misunderstanding? Each attempt at conversation seemed to widen the chasm between them. During their fourth meeting, Robert brought baby clothes, expensive, designer pieces that looked absurdly out of place in the shelter's setting. "This isn't about buying your way back into our lives," Lila said, pushing the bags away. "You can't fix this with your checkbook." "Then tell me how to fix it." Robert's composure finally cracked. "Tell me what you want from me." "I wanted you to care." The words exploded from Lila. "Not about your image, not about your mother's approval, not about your precious company. I wanted you to care about us." The silence that followed was deafening. Mia's soft coos the only sound in the room. "I do care," Robert said quietly. "I just don't know how to show it anymore." Lila gathered Mia in her arms, a shield against the vulnerability in his voice. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've both forgotten how to trust, how to listen." As she walked away, Robert realized that all his business acumen, all his negotiating skills meant nothing in the face of real human connection. They were speaking different languages, his of power and solutions, hers of hurt and survival. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Robert's chauffeur-driven Mercedes idling outside while shelter residents waited for the overcrowded city bus. Inside St. Mary's, the power dynamics played out in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. "The board is concerned about your frequent visits here," James warned during a morning briefing. "They're worried about public perception. Eleanor's been fielding calls from investors." Robert loosened his tie, thinking of Lila serving coffee at the diner down the street, taking night shifts to afford diapers. Let them talk. The social divide became painfully apparent during an unexpected encounter at Bergdorf's. Robert was buying a tie when he spotted Lila in her waitress uniform, serving at the store's cafe. Their eyes met across the marble floor, he in his bespoke suit, she in her polyester uniform. "I didn't know you were working here," he said, approaching her station. "There's a lot you don't know," she replied quietly, conscious of her manager's watchful eye. "Excuse me, I have tables to clear." The next day, Lila was let go. "We maintain certain standards," the manager explained, not quite meeting her eyes. Everyone knew the real reason Robert Anderson's ex-wife couldn't be serving coffee to Manhattan's elite. The shelter buzzed with quiet anger when Lila returned early, jobless again. "It's not right," Jessica muttered, watching Lila rock a colicky Mia. "They treat us like we're invisible until we make them uncomfortable." Sarah called an emergency community meeting. The shelter's funding was being cut, their lease under review. The neighborhood's gentrifying, she explained wearily. They want to build luxury condos. Robert learned about the closure threat through his real estate division. The irony wasn't lost on him. His own company had invested in the development project that would displace these women and children. "You could stop it," Lila challenged him during their next encounter. One word from the mighty Robert Anderson would save 30 families from homelessness. "It's not that simple," he began, then stopped, hearing how hollow the words sounded. It was that simple he just hadn't cared enough to notice before. The shelter's weekly job fair highlighted the brutal reality of their situations. Women with degrees and experience reduced to applying for minimum wage positions because they lacked childcare, professional clothes, or stable addresses. "Your references are impressive," a recruiter told Lila, "but there's a gap in your employment history." The unspoken judgment hung in the air. What respectable company would hire a woman who lived in a shelter? Martha's health took a turn for the worse, but the free clinic had a 3-month waiting list. "I'll manage," she insisted, even as her cough worsened. Robert, who had access to the city's best doctors with a single phone call, felt shame burn in his throat. The inequality extended to their daughter. Robert could offer Mia the finest schools, the best opportunities, while Lila struggled to afford basic necessities. The power to change her life rested in his hands, but wielding that power meant acknowledging his own role in creating the disparity. "They think we choose this," Emma confided during a community dinner, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "Like we wake up one day and decide to be poor, to be vulnerable." The truth hit Robert hard during a board meeting as his executives discussed urban renewal and demographic optimization, sanitized terms for pushing out people like Lila, like Martha, like Emma. He thought of his own mother, who had orchestrated Lila's isolation with the casual cruelty of privilege. "We have appearances to maintain," Eleanor had always said. Now he understood the violence inherent in those words. The final straw came during a charity gala. Robert watched Manhattan's wealthy pat themselves on the back for donating pennies of their fortunes, all while discussing investment opportunities in emerging neighborhoods, code for gentrifying communities like the one around St. Mary's. "You live in two different worlds," Sarah observed, watching Robert struggle to connect with Lila. "The question is, which one are you willing to fight for?" The answer came unexpectedly. During a crucial board meeting about the development project, Robert stood up and walked out, leaving his mother, the board, and his carefully constructed world of privilege behind. "Some things matter more than money," he told James later. "I just wish I'd realized it sooner." That evening, he returned to the shelter not in his usual suit, but in jeans and a sweater. He sat with the residents during dinner, listening to their stories, truly seeing them for the first time. "You look different," Lila remarked, surprised by his casual appearance. "I feel different," he admitted. And he did. The walls of privilege that had isolated him for so long were finally beginning to crack. Robert started visiting the shelter every evening after work, trading his power suits for casual clothes. Each visit was an exercise in humility, marked by awkward attempts to bridge the vast gulf between his world and Lila's. "Would you like to hold her?" Lila asked one evening, surprising both of them. Mia was fussy, fighting sleep as babies often do. Robert took her carefully, as if handling precious crystal, and the infant immediately grabbed his tie with a tiny fist. "Support her head," Lila instructed, adjusting his arms. There, like that, the moment was both tender and tense, filled with unspoken emotions. Robert felt his heart constrict as Mia's eyes, so like his own, studied his face with innocent curiosity. Martha watched these interactions from her corner, knitting needles clicking softly as she observed the tentative dance between the former spouses. "He's trying," she told Lila privately. "Sometimes trying is the first step to changing." The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult night. Mia was teething, her cries echoing through the shelter's halls. Robert arrived to find Lila pacing, exhausted after hours of attempting to soothe their daughter. "Let me," he offered. "You need rest." Lila hesitated, years of self-reliance warring with bone-deep fatigue. Finally she nodded, sinking into a worn armchair while Robert walked with Mia, humming off-key, but with genuine effort. These moments began to accumulate like precious stones, Robert learning to change a diaper disastrously at first, feeding Mia her bottle with intense concentration, reading bored books with exaggerated voices that made the baby giggle. "You're getting better at this," Lila admitted one afternoon, watching him successfully navigate a diaper change without major incident. "Though I think your tie is a casualty." Robert glanced at the baby drool on his silk tie and laughed a genuine, unguarded sound that surprised them both. "I have others," he said, then added more seriously, "This matters more." The other shelter residents slowly warmed to his presence. Emma started saving him a cup of coffee from the morning pot. Jessica offered tips on handling Mia's teething pain. Even Tom began nodding hello instead of watching him suspiciously. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Robert still struggled with the shelter's reality, the constant noise, the shared spaces, the lack of privacy. Sometimes his privileged background showed through in unconscious ways that made Lila bristle. "You can't just throw money at every problem," she snapped when he suggested buying out the entire shelter to prevent its closure. "These people need dignity, not charity." The hardest moments were when Mia reached for Lila instead of him, or when shelter routines he didn't understand took precedence over his planned visits. Each rejection stung, reminding him of all he'd missed. "Patience," Sarah counseled him. "Trust takes time to rebuild, especially when it's being broken by privilege and power." Slowly Robert began to understand that connecting with Mia meant truly seeing and respecting Lila's world. He started attending community dinners, listening to residents' stories, learning names and remembering details about their lives. "Remember when we first met?" he asked Lila one evening as they watched Mia play with donated toys. "At that charity gala. You spilled champagne on my dress," she recalled, a ghost of a smile playing at her lips, then insisted on buying me a new one. "I thought I could fix everything with money back then," he admitted. "I'm starting to realize how wrong I was." The shelter's residents had front-row seats to what they dubbed the Anderson drama, their perspectives shaped by their own experiences with love, loss, and redemption. Each morning's coffee clatch buzzed with observations and opinions about the unfolding story. Martha Watson, with her 72 years of wisdom, became the unofficial mediator between Robert and Lila. Over her perpetually clicking knitting needles, she observed their interactions with the shrewd insight of someone who had seen life's full spectrum. "He reminds me of my William," she told Lila one evening, while helping fold baby clothes. "Proud men often struggle hardest with humility, but when they learn it deep." The younger residents, like Emma, saw their own hopes reflected in the possibility of reconciliation. "He's not like my Tommy," she said, rubbing her pregnant belly. "You can see it in his eyes when he looks at Mia. He wants to be better." Sarah Cooper maintained professional neutrality, but her experienced eyes missed nothing. She watched Robert's transformation from polished CEO to fumbling father with cautious optimism. People can change, she noted during a staff meeting, but they have to want it more than they want their comfort. Jessica, the former nurse, kept a practical perspective. "He's learning," she observed, watching Robert master the art of burping Mia. "Yesterday he brought the right type of diapers without being told. Trust me, that's progress." The shelter's children were less complex in their judgments. They delighted in Mr. Roberts' clumsy attempts at joining their games, teaching him the intricate rules of hopscotch, and showing him their homework with innocent pride. "You're different from the other suits, Tom," the maintenance man grudgingly admitted one day when Robert helped him fix a broken window. "Most of them don't even see us, let alone pick up a hammer." The weekly community dinners became a testing ground for Robert's integration into their world. Women who had once eyed him suspiciously now saved him a plate, correcting his table manners with good-humored teasing. "Rich folk eat different," Claire Wilson observed, watching him struggle with paper plates and plastic utensils. "But hunger makes us all the same in the end." Not everyone was convinced. Some residents, burned by their own experiences with wealthy men, remained skeptical. "Men like that don't change," warned Betty, a former executive's wife. "They just learn better tricks." But even the skeptics couldn't deny the changes they witnessed. Robert's designer suits gave way to casual clothes during his visits. His phone, once perpetually in hand, stayed in his pocket. He learned to listen more than he spoke, to observe more than he judged. The shelter's teenage residents found particular amusement in teaching him their slang, delighting in his confused attempts to use it correctly. "He's trying too hard," they giggled, "but at least he's trying." Martha's influence grew stronger as she became a bridge between the two worlds. Her room became a neutral territory where both Robert and Lila could speak freely, guided by her gentle wisdom and sharp wit. "Love isn't about grand gestures," she told Robert during one of their talks. "It's about showing up day after day, especially when it's hard." The shelter's sense of community began to affect Robert in unexpected ways. He found himself drawn into the daily rhythms of their shared lives: the morning rush for hot water, the afternoon homework sessions, the evening story times. "You're becoming real," Sarah remarked one evening, finding him washing dishes after a community dinner. "Less CEO, more human." The transformation wasn't lost on Lila, who watched through the lens of both hope and caution. The shelter residents became her sounding board, offering advice filtered through their own experiences. "Second chances are rare," Martha reminded her, "but so is true change. You have to decide if what you're seeing is real." The truth emerged on a rainy Tuesday evening when James Parker arrived at the shelter clutching a weathered box. His face was grave as he asked to speak with both Robert and Lila. "I found these while clearing out the old filing cabinets," he said, placing the box on the conference room table. Inside were dozens of letters, cards, and even sonogram pictures, all sent by Lila during her pregnancy, all intercepted before reaching Robert. "Patricia kept everything," James explained quietly. "She said Eleanor instructed her to shield you from any complications during the merger negotiations." Robert's hands shook as he lifted a Christmas card from the box. Inside was a sonogram picture with the words "Your baby's first photo" written in Lila's elegant handwriting. The date showed Mia at 12 weeks. "I sent that the day before Christmas," Lila whispered, her voice thick with remembered pain. "I thought maybe during the holidays." All revelations followed. Eleanor Anderson's carefully orchestrated campaign to isolate Lila came to light through emails and memos. She had contacted Lila's employers, spreading rumors that made her unemployable in corporate Manhattan. She had pressured their social circle to choose sides, ensuring Lila's support system crumbled. She said it was for the good of the company, Patricia confessed when confronted. The former secretary's eyes filled with tears. "I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job. My daughter was in college." The most damning discovery was a recording of Eleanor speaking to the hospital administrator during Lila's pregnancy complications. "Whatever she needs," Eleanor had said, "but ensure all bills are sent to her directly. We can't have any connection to Anderson Corp." Robert listened to the recording in his office, his mother's cold voice filling the room. "The Morgan merger is worth billions," she said. "We can't let a pregnancy scandal derail it." When he confronted Eleanor at her penthouse, she remained unrepentant. "I did what was necessary," she declared. "You were building an empire. She would have ruined everything." "She was carrying my child," Robert's voice shook with fury. "Your grandchild." "Children can be dealt with quietly," Eleanor replied dismissively. "The right private schools, trust funds. There are ways to handle these situations discreetly." The final piece fell into place when James discovered a trust document, prepared but never executed, that would have provided for Lila and the baby in exchange for their silence and disappearance from Robert's life. "I never saw this," Lila said, reading the document with horror. "They didn't even give me the choice." The shelter's common room became a sanctuary as Robert and Lila processed these revelations. Martha brought them tea, her quiet presence a comfort as they sifted through years of deception. "I thought you knew," Lila admitted. "I thought you chose the company over us." "I thought you left because I wasn't enough," Robert responded, the truth raw in his throat, "that you didn't want the life I could offer." The weight of lost time, of needless suffering, settled between them. Mia slept peacefully in her carrier, unaware of the storms of truth breaking around her. Sarah found them there at midnight, surrounded by letters and documents, the evidence of elaborate betrayal spread across the table. "Sometimes," she said gently, "knowing the truth isn't about placing blame. It's about understanding where to begin healing." Robert stared at a photo of Lila in the hospital, clearly taken without her knowledge. His mother's surveillance had been thorough, her manipulation complete. The realization of how deeply he'd failed to protect the woman he loved, the mother of his child, settled like lead in his stomach. "I'll resign tomorrow," he declared. "The company, the board, all of it." "That's not what I want," Lila said quietly. "I never wanted you to lose everything. I just wanted you to choose us." The crisis struck without warning on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Robert had just arrived at the shelter for his daily visit when he heard Lila's panicked voice from their room. Mia's normally rosy cheeks were flushed with fever, her tiny body burning hot to the touch. "She won't stop coughing," Lila explained, her voice trembling as she cradled their daughter. "And her breathing. Something's wrong." The baby's chest heaved with each labored breath, making a frightening whistling sound. Jessica, the former nurse, rushed in to check on Mia. Her professional composure cracked as she listened to the baby's chest. "She needs a hospital," she declared firmly. "Now. Her oxygen levels are dropping." Robert reached for his phone to call his private physician, but Lila was already wrapping Mia in a blanket. "The children's hospital is 12 blocks away," she said. "They know her history." "My car's outside," Robert insisted, finally saying something useful. For once, his wealth could serve a purpose beyond status. The three of them rushed through the shelter's halls, Martha calling after them with promises of prayers. In the back of his Mercedes, Robert held Mia, while Lila rattled off medical history to the emergency room over the phone. The baby felt impossibly small in his arms, each troubled breath tearing at his heart. "She had pneumonia last month," Lila explained, her voice tight with fear. "The doctors said her lungs were vulnerable, but the medication was so expensive." The words hit Robert like physical blows. While he'd been signing million-dollar contracts, his daughter had gone without needed medication. The gulf between his world and theirs had never felt wider. The emergency room was chaos, crying children, harried nurses, the antiseptic smell that barely masked underlying illness. Robert started to pull out his platinum insurance card, ready to demand private treatment, but Lila's hand on his arm stopped him. "We wait like everyone else," she said quietly. "Money doesn't make Mia's need more urgent than these other children." The lesson in humility struck deep. They sat in hard plastic chairs, watching other families face their own crises. A young mother comforted her crying toddler. An elderly man held his grandson's hand. Pain and love knew no social boundaries here. When they finally saw the doctor, the diagnosis was severe bronchitis compounded by her previous pneumonia. "She'll need to stay for observation," the doctor explained. "Her oxygen levels are concerning." The private room Robert managed to secure felt like a fortress, but it couldn't protect them from the fear. Lila never left Mia's side, singing soft lullabies through the night. Robert watched them both, understanding for the first time the true meaning of powerlessness. "I should have been there," he whispered as dawn broke, watching Mia sleep fitfully under the oxygen mask. All those months, all those months, all those decisions about her care that you had to make alone." Lila's exhausted eyes met his. "You're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters to her." Throughout the day, shelter residents arrived in shifts bringing coffee, sandwiches, and quiet support. Martha came with her knitting needles, settling into a corner to keep vigil. Sarah coordinated with social services to ensure the hospital bills wouldn't devastate Lila's fragile finances. "This is what family does," Martha explained when Robert expressed surprise at their dedication. "Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you find when you need it most." Watching the shelter community rally around his daughter, Robert felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of wealth and worth. His mother's social circle would send flowers and cards, but these people who had so little gave time, presence, and genuine love. Eleanor Anderson strode into the hospital like she owned it, her Chanel suit and pearls a stark contrast to the fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors. She'd learned about Mia's hospitalization through her network of society contacts. "This has gone far enough, Robert," she declared, finding him in the hallway outside Mia's room. "You're making a spectacle of yourself. The board is concerned." Robert straightened from his exhausted slouch against the wall. For the first time he saw his mother clearly not as the family matriarch he'd always deferred to, but as the manipulator who'd orchestrated so much pain. "My daughter is fighting to breathe," he said quietly, dangerously. "And you're worried about the board." Your daughter Eleanor's laugh was brittle. A child conceived during a failing marriage, born in questionable circumstances. Do you know what this could do to our family's reputation? The conversation might have continued in this vein, but Lila emerged from Mia's room at that moment. Her eyes were red from crying, her clothes rumpled from sleeping in a hospital chair. "Get out," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "You don't get to stand here and question my child's legitimacy while she's lying in there with tubes in her arms." Eleanor drew herself up, ready to deliver a scathing response, but Robert stepped between them. "Enough, Mother. You orchestrated this whole situation. You intercepted Lila's letters, sabotaged her career, isolated her when she needed support most." "I protected our family's interests," Eleanor snapped. "Someone had to think about the bigger picture while you were playing CEO." The bigger picture. Robert's laugh was hollow. "My daughter could have died because her mother couldn't afford medication. That's your bigger picture." Martha chose that moment to appear, her aged frame somehow filling the corridor. "I believe," she said with quiet authority, "that this conversation should happen elsewhere. This is a place of healing." Eleanor looked at the elderly shelter resident with undisguised disdain. "And who might you be?" "Someone who knows the difference between family and manipulation," Martha replied calmly. Something you might want to learn, Mrs. Anderson, before you lose your son completely." The truth of Martha's words hung in the air. Robert looked between his mother, perfectly coiffed, coldly calculating, and the makeshift family that had gathered around his daughter Lila's fierce protective love, Martha's wise presence, the shelter residents who took turns bringing coffee and sitting vigil. "Leave," he told Eleanor, "and don't come back. Not to the hospital, not to my office, not to my life, until you understand what you've done." "You're choosing them," Eleanor's voice rose incredulously. "Over your own mother. Over everything I built." "No," Mother Robert replied wearily. "I'm choosing to be someone my daughter can be proud of. Something you never taught me how to do." After Eleanor's clicking heels faded down the corridor, Lila touched Robert's arm gently. "Mia's asking for you," she said softly. "She's awake." In that moment, watching his mother walk away while turning toward his daughter's room, Robert understood that sometimes family is less about blood and more about choices. Eleanor had made hers long ago, choosing power over love. Now it was his turn to choose. In the quiet hours of the hospital night, while Mia slept peacefully for the first time in days, Robert faced the hardest decisions of his life. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from the board, his mother's lawyers, and concerned shareholders. "The board has called an emergency meeting," James informed him via text. "Eleanor's pushing for a vote of no confidence. You need to decide how to handle this." Lila found him in the hospital chapel, staring unseeingly at the flickering candles. She sat beside him, careful to maintain the distance that had become habit between them. "The shelter's facing closure next month," she said quietly. "Sarah just told me. The development company isn't extending the lease." Robert's laugh was bitter. "The development company I own? You mean?" He ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "Everything I built, everything I thought mattered, it's all part of the problem." "It doesn't have to be," Lila replied. "Power isn't inherently evil, Robert. It's how you use it." The choice crystallized in that moment. Robert pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. The first to James, instructing him to sell his controlling shares in the development company. The second to his lawyers, ordering them to transfer ownership of the shelter building to a community trust. The third to the board, declining to attend their emergency meeting. "You're giving up everything," Lila observed, watching him end the last call. "No," he corrected her. "I'm choosing what matters." The next morning brought the consequences of his choices. His mother's lawyers arrived with paperwork to freeze his assets. The board voted to suspend him pending investigation. His carefully constructed world of power and privilege began crumbling. "You could fight this," James advised, visiting during his lunch break. "We have enough evidence of Eleanor's manipulation to sway the board." But Robert, watching Mia play with the stuffed bear Martha had brought her, knew he didn't want to fight, not in the old ways of corporate warfare and legal battles. Sometimes, Martha observed, knitting in her usual corner, we have to lose everything we thought we wanted to find what we really need. The shelter community rallied around them in unexpected ways. Claire offered her teaching credentials to help set up a proper daycare center. Tom volunteered his maintenance skills for renovations. Even Emma, with her accounting degree, offered to help manage the trust's finances. "This isn't charity," Sarah explained when Robert expressed surprise at their support. "It's community, something your money could never buy." But the hardest choice came when Lila offered to let him stay in her small room at the shelter after his assets were frozen. The room barely fit her and Mia, yet she was willing to share what little she had. "You don't have to do this," he protested. "No," she agreed. "But Mia needs her father, and maybe we all need to learn what really matters." In the end, Robert Anderson, former CEO and billionaire, moved into St. Mary's Community Shelter with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a new understanding of wealth. His mother's social circle was scandalized. The business world buzzed with rumors of his mental breakdown. But watching Mia fall asleep in her small crib, listening to the sounds of the shelter's evening routine, Robert felt richer than he ever had in his penthouse suite. The morning headlines screamed across every major newspaper: Anderson heiress mental breakdown and billionaire CEO abandons empire for homeless shelter, but these weren't the worst blows Eleanor Anderson had planned for her son. "They're auditing the shelter's finances," Sarah announced during an emergency staff meeting. "State inspectors arrived tomorrow." Her voice trembled with barely controlled anger. "Someone filed complaints about misappropriation of funds." Robert recognized his mother's tactics immediately. Unable to control him directly, she was attacking what he now held dear. The shelter's residents watched anxiously as government officials combed through their sanctuary, questioning everything from food storage to fire exits. "It's not just the audit," James warned, meeting Robert secretly in a downtown diner. "Eleanor's allies on the board are pushing to freeze all your charitable contributions from the past 6 months. They're claiming diminished capacity due to emotional stress." Lila found Robert in their small shared room surrounded by papers and legal documents. "They're questioning my fitness as a mother," she said quietly. "Child Services received an anonymous tip about Mia's living conditions." The coordinated attack left them reeling. Eleanor had mobilized every connection, every ounce of influence to destroy not just Robert but everyone he cared about. The shelter's residents faced increased scrutiny, their past records examined, their current situations questioned. Martha's wisdom provided unexpected strength. "In my 72 years, she declared during a community meeting, "I've learned that people who fight this dirty are usually terrified of losing something themselves." Her words proved prophetic. Through his remaining contacts, Robert discovered Eleanor's desperate motive. The Morgan merger, her crown jewel of social climbing, depended on the Anderson family's pristine reputation. A scandal-ridden son living in a homeless shelter threatened everything she'd orchestrated. The shelter's residents refused to break under pressure. When inspectors questioned their parenting abilities, they showed up to meetings supporting each other's children. When auditors examined their job searches, they produced detailed records of every application, interview, and rejection. "We may be poor," Claire announced, standing proud before the investigators, "but we have dignity, and we take care of our own." The unexpected counterattack came from an unlikely source. Patricia, Robert's former secretary, chose that moment to go public. She released years of documented evidence: Eleanor's manipulation, the intercepted letters, the coordinated campaign to isolate Lila during her pregnancy. "I can't stay silent anymore," she told the press. "What was done to MS, Mitchell, and that baby? It wasn't just business. It was cruel." The shelter transformed into a fortress of solidarity. Tom reinforced security measures. Jessica documented every resident's medical needs and care plans. Emma organized their financial records with professional precision. Each person contributed what they could to protect their community. Robert watched in awe as the people his mother dismissed as unfortunates demonstrated more strength and integrity than his entire corporate board. They fought not with lawyers and money, but with truth and unity. "Your mother doesn't understand what she's up against," Sarah observed, watching the residents comfort each other's children during yet another inspection. "She thinks we're weak because we're poor. She doesn't realize that surviving poverty requires more strength than maintaining wealth." The investigations continued, but something unexpected emerged. Every attack meant to expose the shelter's weaknesses instead revealed its strengths. Every attempt to divide them brought them closer together. "We're not just fighting for the shelter anymore," Lila realized, cradling a sleeping Mia. "We're fighting for the right to choose our own family, our own values." While the external battles raged, Robert and Lila faced their own internal struggles. Living in close quarters at the shelter forced them to confront not just their present circumstances, but the ghosts of their past. One night, after Mia finally drifted off to sleep, Robert found Lila crying silently in the shelter's kitchen. "I keep wondering," she whispered, "if I had fought harder to reach you, if I hadn't let my pride stop me from trying one more time." "Don't," Robert interrupted, his voice rough. "I was the one who built those walls. I was so convinced that success meant power, control, status. I couldn't see that real wealth was sitting right across my dinner table." Their shared space became both blessing and curse. Every morning brought intimate moments. They'd lost Mia's first attempts at crawling, her delighted giggles at peek-a-boo, the way she reached for both of them with complete trust. But nights brought memories of their failed marriage, of promises broken and dreams abandoned. "I don't know how to do this," Robert admitted to Martha during one of their late-night talks. "I spent years learning to be a CEO, but nobody taught me how to be a father, a partner, a decent human being." The shelter's routines challenged everything Robert knew. He struggled with shared bathrooms, with waiting his turn for the microwave, with the constant noise and lack of privacy. Yet each humbling moment taught him something his wealth never had. Lila battled her own demons. "Sometimes I look at him with Mia," she confided to Sarah, "and I see everything I hoped he could be. Then I remember how easily he walked away before, and I'm terrified of letting myself trust again." Their daughter became their bridge and their challenge. Mia's needs forced them to communicate, to coordinate, to put aside their personal discomfort for her sake. But her innocent love also highlighted the depth of what they'd lost. "She has your smile," Robert observed one evening, watching Mia play with her second-hand toys. "I used to love making you smile like that." Lila's response was quiet. "You still could, if you'd let yourself be real instead of perfect." The shelter residents watched their struggle with understanding eyes. Many had their own stories of love lost and found, of pride swallowed and trust rebuilt. Emma's growing belly reminded them of Lila's lonely pregnancy. Jessica's tales of her own recovery from divorce offered hope. Robert's business instincts warred with his emerging humanity. During community meetings, he had to constantly check his impulse to take control, to solve problems with money rather than listening and understanding. "You're learning," Martha noted, watching him help Tom fix the ancient washing machine instead of suggesting they buy a new one. "Sometimes the richest solutions don't cost a dime." Lila struggled with accepting help, especially from Robert. Years of self-reliance made every offered assistance feel like an admission of failure. Yet watching him learn to change diapers, to soothe Mia's tears, to navigate life without privilege, slowly began to thaw her frozen trust. Their most profound challenges came at night, when Mia slept and they were left with only their thoughts and each other. The small room forced an intimacy neither was prepared for, yet both increasingly craved. "Do you ever regret it?" Robert asked one night, his voice barely audible above Mia's soft breathing. "Marrying me?" Lila was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that we both thought love was enough without work, that we didn't know how to fight for each other instead of with each other." Their personal growth became the shelter's daily entertainment and education. Residents watched the mighty CEO learn to do laundry, to budget groceries, to wait patiently in line. They saw the proud single mother learn to accept support, to share her daughter, to risk her heart again. "Love's funny that way," Martha observed to anyone who would listen. "Sometimes it has to break you down completely before it can build you up right." The crisis struck on a rainy Tuesday morning when Sarah called an emergency meeting. Her face was ashen as she delivered the news the state had suspended the shelter's operating license pending investigation. They had 48 hours to relocate all residents. "This isn't just about us anymore," Sarah explained, her voice trembling. 3 other shelters in the city received similar notices. They're systematically dismantling the support system for vulnerable families. The community room erupted in panic. Emma, now 7 months pregnant, burst into tears. Jessica held her 2 boys close, while Claire tried to calm the other children who sensed their parents' distress. Martha's usually steady hands shook as she gripped her walking stick. "Where will we all go?" she asked, voicing everyone's fears. At 72, with only Social Security for income, she had few options. Tom, who had maintained the building for 15 years, slammed his fist against the wall. "This place was up to code last month. I made sure of it. These violations they're citing, they're manufactured." Robert recognized the tactical precision of the attack. It bore his mother's signature: systematic, thorough, designed to scatter the community beyond hope of reassembly. But he also saw something she hadn't counted on: the strength of desperate people fighting for their home. Lila took charge, her teaching background emerging as she organized the residents into action teams. "Claire, you and the other teachers start documenting every educational program we run. Jessica, get me medical records showing the preventive care we provide. Emma, your accounting skills, we need a full financial audit." The shelter transformed into a war room. Residents worked through the night, gathering evidence, documenting their community's value. Children helped by drawing pictures of what the shelter meant to them. Teenagers recorded video testimonials about how the programs had changed their lives. "Look at this," Sarah said, reviewing their files. "In the past year alone, we've helped 12 women secure full-time employment, gotten 8 families into permanent housing, and supported 15 children in maintaining honor roll status at school." But the most powerful response came from Martha. Despite her arthritis, she spent hours writing letters to every resident they'd helped over the past decade. The responses flooded in: successful businesswomen, college graduates, stable families, all testifying to the shelter's crucial role in their transformation. The crisis deepened when they discovered the truth behind the shutdown. Eleanor Anderson had engineered a city-wide urban renewal initiative, targeting properties like the shelter for luxury development. The systematic closure of homeless shelters was just phase 1. "She's not just attacking us," Robert realized. "She's trying to erase any evidence that people like us exist in her perfect world." The community's response was unprecedented. Former residents took time off work to protest at City Hall. Local churches offered temporary housing. Small business owners who had once been shelter residents themselves provided meals and supplies. Tom worked tirelessly to address every cited violation, no matter how minor. Jessica organized health screenings to demonstrate the medical necessity of their services. Claire documented how their educational programs exceeded state standards. But it was the children who delivered the most powerful message. Led by Jessica's oldest son, they created a social media campaign sharing their shelter stories. The hashtag #SaveOurShelter began trending locally, then nationally. "Your mother miscalculated," Lila told Robert as they watched the community mobilize. "She thought poverty meant powerlessness. She never understood that real strength comes from having nothing left to lose." Martha's health deteriorated under the stress, but she refused to rest. "This place saved my life," she declared from her post at the front desk, where she coordinated volunteer efforts. "I won't let them take it without a fight." The 48-hour deadline loomed, but the shelter's residents stood firm. They would not be scattered, would not be erased. They had built more than just a temporary housing facility, they had created a family. As the sun set on the second day, Sarah gathered everyone in the community room. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, her voice strong despite her exhaustion, "remember this: they can take our building, but they cannot take what we've built in each other." The children curled up in their parents' laps, the elderly residents sat in their usual chairs, and the makeshift family faced their uncertain future together. In that moment, watching his daughter sleep peacefully in Lila's arms, Robert understood what real power looked like: not the kind that destroyed communities, but the kind that built them. The blow came without warning. Martha collapsed during the morning community meeting, her small frame crumpling like paper as she reached for her heart. The ambulance sirens pierced the shelter's usual morning calm, their wail a harbinger of change no one was prepared for. "Massive heart attack," the doctor explained hours later in the hospital waiting room. The stress of recent events likely contributed. Her age and previous conditions, he trailed off, his clinical words inadequate to describe the loss they faced. Sarah found Martha's journal later that evening, its pages filled with the shelter's history. every resident's story, every small victory, every moment of grace in their shared struggles. She had documented them all. The last entry was unfinished today. We fight for more than walls and windows. We fight for the right to. The shelter felt hollow without Martha's presence. Her empty rocking chair in the corner became a shrine of sorts, where residents left small tokens, a half-finished knitting project, children's drawings, the cookies she loved to share during story time. "She was my first friend here," Lila whispered to Robert as they sat vigil by Martha's hospital bed. "When I arrived pregnant and scared, she just handed me a cup of tea and said, 'Tell me your story, dear. No judgment, no advice, just love.'" The monitors beeped steadily, counting out Martha's remaining moments. The shelter residents took turns sitting with her, ensuring she was never alone. They brought her favorite hymns, memories, and prayers, filling her room with the community she had helped build. Robert watched these bedside gatherings with growing understanding. In his corporate world, power was measured in dollars and deals. But here, in this sterile hospital room, he witnessed true influence, the kind that changed lives one cup of tea at a time. She knew, Jessica revealed during her watch, about the development plans, about Eleanor's involvement. She made me promise not to tell until she couldn't fight anymore. She handed Robert a worn envelope. "She left this for you both." Inside was a letter, written in Martha's shaky hand. "My dear ones, some battles choose us. When I lost everything to medical bills, I thought my story was over. But the shelter taught me that endings are just beginnings in disguise. Robert, your mother thinks she's fighting for legacy, but she's forgotten what truly lasts. It's not buildings or bank accounts, it's the lives we touch, the hearts we heal. Lila, my brave girl, forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the strongest choice we can make. And Robert, real power isn't in what you can take, but in what you can give. I've lived long enough to know that love, especially broken love, can be rebuilt stronger at the cracks. Take care of each other. Take care of our family. All my love. Martha." The letter blurred through their tears. Outside the hospital window, the city skyline glittered indifferently, its towers of glass and steel standing tall while one of its quietest heroes slipped away. That night, Martha Watson left them as gently as she had lived. No grand gestures, no final speeches, just a peaceful sigh as her heart finally found rest. But in her passing, she left them something invaluable, a blueprint for what truly matters. The shelter's residents organized her memorial service with the same care she had shown them. Stories flowed of midnight counseling sessions over hot chocolate, of wisdom shared while folding laundry, of courage taught through quiet example. "She saved us all in different ways," Emma said, resting a hand on her pregnant belly. "And she never asked for anything in return except that we do the same for others." As they gathered in the shelter's community room after the service, surrounded by Martha's photographs and mementos, Robert and Lila realized that they had lost more than a friend. They had lost a guardian of their redemption story, the witness to their slow journey back to each other. But in losing Martha, they found something unexpected, a shared determination to honor her legacy, to fight not just for themselves but for the family she had helped forge in life's hardest moments. The morning after Martha's memorial service, Robert made a decision that would change everything. Standing in the shelter's small office, he directed his lawyers to transfer his personal fortune, everything not frozen by the board, into a trust for the shelter. "You can't do this," James protested, watching his friends sign away millions. "They'll say it proves you're mentally unstable. You'll lose everything." "No," Robert replied, his pen steady. "For the first time, I'm choosing what's worth keeping." The sacrifice sent shockwaves through Manhattan's elite circles. Eleanor Anderson held an emergency press conference, publicly denouncing her son's reckless behavior and emotional instability. The board moved to permanently remove him as CEO. Lila found him later that evening, sitting in Martha's empty rocking chair. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "We would have found another way." "Martha taught me something," he responded, watching me asleep in her second-hand crib. "Real wealth isn't what you keep. It's what you give when giving costs you everything." The challenges mounted. Eleanor's lawyers moved to contest the trust, claiming diminished capacity. The media camped outside the shelter, turning their private struggles into public entertainment. Former business associates crossed the street to avoid him. But within the shelter's walls, something remarkable happened. The residents rallied around them, offering what little they had. Emma shared her accounting expertise to help structure the trust. Tom used his maintenance skills to fortify the building against media intrusion. Claire organized a homeschool program for the children affected by the publicity. "This is what Martha meant," Sarah observed, watching the community adapt and strengthen. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to find out what we really have." Lila faced her own battles. Child services, prompted by anonymous complaints, increased their scrutiny. Her job prospects dwindled as potential employers recognized her from the news. Yet she refused to break. "I was ashamed when I first came here," she told Robert during a rare quiet moment. "A failed marriage, pregnant, homeless. I thought I'd lost everything. But Martha showed me that sometimes losing your old life makes room for a better one." The sacrifice demanded more than money. Robert learned to swallow his pride, accepting help from those he once would have dismissed. He took odd jobs, maintenance work with Tom, night security shifts, anything to contribute to the community that had taken him in. "You've changed," James remarked during a clandestine coffee meeting. "The Robert I knew would never have traded his empire for this." "The Robert you knew," he replied, "didn't understand the difference between price and value." Their daughter thrived amidst the challenges, surrounded by a community that valued love over luxury. Mia's first steps were celebrated by everyone in the shelter, her giggles echoing through halls that had seen so many tears. The most profound sacrifices were internal. Robert had to let go of his need for control, his belief that money could solve every problem. Lila had to sacrifice her protective walls, learning to trust not just Robert, but the possibility of happiness again. Martha would be proud, Sarah told them, watching them work together during a community dinner. She always said true love isn't about grand gestures, it's about choosing each other every day, especially when it's hard. The trust faced legal challenges, their futures remained uncertain, but something unshakable had been built in the crucible of their sacrifice. The shelter's residents, once strangers thrown together by circumstance, had become the family Martha always knew they could be. One evening, as they sat together in the community room, Robert found Lila's hand in the darkness. No words were needed, they had both lost and found everything in this place. Martha's empty rocking chair creaked gently in the corner, a reminder that the greatest sacrifices often lead to the most precious gifts. The truth emerged on a quiet Sunday evening, while the shelter residents gathered for their weekly community dinner. Eleanor Anderson walked through the front door, unannounced and alone, her usual polished facade cracking around the edges. "I found this in your father's study," she said to Robert, holding out a weathered leather journal. "I should have given it to you years ago." Richard Anderson's private thoughts filled the pages, including his final entries before his death 10 years ago. The last pages revealed a truth that shook both Robert and Eleanor to their core. He was planning to convert the company into a charitable trust. Robert read aloud, his voice trembling. He saw what the pursuit of wealth was doing to our family. "Mom, did you know?" Eleanor sank into Martha's empty rocking chair, suddenly looking every one of her 70 years. "I thought I was protecting his legacy, your legacy. I was so wrong." Lila watched the scene unfold, holding Mia close as mother and son confronted decades of misunderstanding. The shelter residents quietly excused themselves, giving the family privacy, but their supportive presence remained just beyond the door. "I was terrified," Eleanor admitted, tears falling freely now. "When your father died, everyone expected us to fail. I turned his dream of helping others into an obsession with power because I thought that was the only way to keep his memory alive. The revelation rippled through the room. Robert remembered his father's gentle strength, so different from the corporate warfare his mother had taught him. He would have loved this place, he said softly. He would have understood what Martha tried to show us. Lila stepped forward, still holding Mia. "Would you like to hold your granddaughter?" she offered, extending an olive branch that brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. As Eleanor held Mia for the first time, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The baby reached up, touching her grandmother's pearl necklace with curious fingers, unknowingly bridging 3 generations of pain and healing. "I did something unforgivable," Eleanor confessed, looking at Lila. "I was so focused on protecting what I thought was important, I destroyed what really mattered. Can you ever forgive me?" Sarah appeared in the doorway carrying Martha's last unfinished knitting project. "Martha used to say that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past," she said gently. "It's about choosing to build a different future." The emotional walls that had divided them for so long began to crumble. Robert shared stories of his father that Eleanor had never heard. Eleanor revealed vulnerabilities she'd hidden beneath her perfect exterior. Lila spoke of her own fears and hopes during her pregnancy. "Your father would be so disappointed in what I've become," Eleanor whispered, watching Mia play with a donated toy. "No," Robert corrected her. "He'd be proud that we finally found our way back to what he always wanted for us to be, a family that helps others, not just ourselves." The shelter residents gradually returned, bringing with them the warmth and acceptance that Martha had taught them. They shared food, stories, and most importantly, understanding. Emma, her pregnancy now near term, sat beside Eleanor. "My own mother disowned me when I chose my baby over her expectations," she said softly. "But Martha showed me that real family is built on love, not obligation." As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor stood to leave, visibly transformed. "I can't undo what I've done," she said, "but perhaps, with your permission, I can help protect what you're building here." The next morning, Eleanor's lawyers arrived with new papers not to fight the trust, but to strengthen it. She had decided to add her own fortune to Robert's, ensuring the shelter's future and establishing a foundation in Martha's name. "Martha would say this isn't about the money," Sarah observed, watching the lawyers work. "It's about choosing love over fear, community over power." That night, as Robert and Lila put Mia to bed, they felt the weight of generations healing. The shelter's walls seemed to hold not just their residents' stories, but the echo of Richard Anderson's dream, Martha's wisdom, and the promise of a future built on understanding rather than wealth. In Martha's empty rocking chair, they placed her unfinished knitting a baby blanket she had started for Emma's child. The incomplete stitches reminded them that some stories don't need perfect endings to be beautiful. The morning Eleanor's confession hit the press. Manhattan's elite circles imploded. The New York Times headline read, "Anderson matriarch reveals decade of corporate manipulation," followed by detailed exposes of systematic suppression of charitable initiatives and family betrayals. James arrived at the shelter clutching a thick folder of documents. "The board members are turning on each other," he announced. "Everyone's trying to save themselves, but there's more." He spread papers across the community room table, revealing a web of corporate corruption that went far beyond Eleanor's actions. "Your father's original company records," he explained to Robert. "I found them in a sealed vault. Every charitable project he planned, every community initiative Eleanor killed, it's all here. And there's evidence that some board members were embezzling from the foundation meant for community support." Lila, who had been quietly reviewing the documents, gasped. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a familiar name. "The law firm that fired me, they were on Eleanor's payroll. It wasn't just about me, they've been systematically discriminating against pregnant women for years." The revelations kept coming. Patricia, Robert's former secretary, arrived with years of recorded conversations and emails. "Mrs. Anderson wasn't working alone," she explained. There was an entire network dedicated to maintaining the family's perfect image, no matter the human cost. But Sarah discovered that the shelter's recent licensing troubles were part of a larger scheme. They've been targeting every community support organization in the city, she revealed. It's not just about real estate development, they're trying to erase poverty from sight rather than address it. The most shocking truth came from an unexpected source. Claire found old photographs in the shelter's archives showing a young Eleanor volunteering at the very same shelter 30 years ago. She was pregnant, Claire noted, studying the images. But there's no record of another child. Robert confronted his mother that evening. Eleanor's composed facade finally cracked completely. "I was 17, she whispered. "Your father's parents gave me a choice: give up the baby or lose everything. I chose wrong, and I've been choosing wrong ever since." The shelter residents listened in stunned silence as Eleanor revealed how her own lost child had driven her obsession with family image and control. Her tears fell freely now, decades of suppressed grief finally finding release. "Every pregnant woman I saw," she admitted, looking at Lila, "reminded me of my weakness. When you chose your baby over everything else, I couldn't bear to see someone be stronger than I had been." Tom, who had maintained the shelter's buildings for decades, produced maintenance logs dating back to Eleanor's time there. "The donation that saved the shelter that year," he said quietly, "came from an anonymous source. It was you, wasn't it?" Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. The truth of her connection to the shelter, her desperate attempts to both preserve and destroy it, illuminated years of contradictory actions. In the midst of these revelations, Mia took her first steps, toddling across the community room floor, as all 3 generations of Andersons watched. The simple joy of the moment cut through the weight of exposed secrets. "Truth," Martha had written in her final journal entry, "is like water. No matter how hard you try to contain it, it finds its way free." In the quiet aftermath of the revelations, Robert found himself sitting in Martha's rocking chair, watching the shelter's evening routines unfold. The sight of residents helping each other, sharing meals and stories, triggered a profound realization. "I spent my entire life building walls," he confided to Lila as she joined him. "Not just around my wealth, but around my heart. I thought vulnerability was weakness. I was terrified of becoming my mother, but I'd already become exactly what she feared most: someone who chose power over love." Lila, cradling a sleeping Mia, considered his words. "We all build walls," she responded softly. "I built mine out of pride, telling myself I didn't need anyone, but Martha saw through them all. She used to say that the strongest walls are the ones we build together, not to keep people out, but to protect what matters." The shelter's community became a mirror, reflecting truths they'd both avoided. Robert watched Emma prepare for her baby's arrival with the same fear and determination Lila must have felt. He saw his own corporate ruthlessness reflected in how he'd once dismissed people like Tom, whose quiet dignity now humbled him. "I don't know how to be powerful without being cruel," he admitted during a late-night conversation with Sarah. "I learned business, but I never learned humanity." Sarah's response was gentle but firm. "You're learning now. Real power isn't in what you control, but in what you nurture." Lila faced her own revelations. Watching Eleanor's vulnerability crack through years of perfectionism, she recognized her own tendency to wear independence like armor. "I was so afraid of needing someone," she told Jessica during their morning coffee ritual. "I almost denied Mia the chance to know her father." The shelter's children became their greatest teachers. Their unconditional acceptance, their ability to forge family bonds without blood ties, demonstrated everything the adult world had forgotten. "They don't see rich or poor," Claire observed, watching Mia play with the other children. "They just see people who need love." One evening, as Robert helped with dinner preparation, a task that would have been unthinkable months ago, he caught his reflection in the kitchen window. The man staring back wasn't the polished CEO or the ruthless businessman. He was just a father, learning to chop vegetables alongside others who had become family. Sometimes, he said to no one in particular, you have to lose your reflection to find your true face. Lila, overhearing him, remembered Martha's words about broken things being rebuilt stronger at the cracks. She looked at their small family, not perfect, not polished, but real, and understood that some treasures can only be found after everything else is lost. The transformation of Anderson Corp began not in the boardroom but in the shelter's humble community room. Eleanor, driven by her newfound truth, called an emergency shareholders meeting that would reshape the company's future. My husband had a vision, she announced to the stunned board members, not of empire building but of community service. Today we return to that vision. With that, she revealed Richard Anderson's original plans for the company's charitable foundation. The corporate power structure crumbled like a house of cards. Board members who had participated in the embezzlement scheme resigned in disgrace. Those who had helped suppress Lila faced legal consequences. The company's priorities shifted dramatically under the weight of public revelation and internal reform. We're converting the majority of our real estate holdings into affordable housing, James explained to the shelter residents, starting with this building and expanding throughout the city. Richard Anderson's dream is finally becoming reality. The shelter itself underwent a transformation. Instead of closing, it expanded, with Eleanor and Robert establishing the Martha Watson Memorial Foundation. Sarah was appointed executive director, with Lila heading the educational programs division. Martha always said true power lies in lifting others, Sarah reminded them during the foundation's first meeting. Now we have the chance to prove her right. The power shift extended beyond the corporate world. The shelter's residents, once viewed as society's cast-offs, became active participants in their community's transformation. Emma established a support program for young mothers. Jessica's medical expertise helped create an on-site clinic. Tom's maintenance skills were formally recognized with a position as facilities director. We're not just changing lives, Lila observed, watching the shelter evolve. We're changing the definition of power itself. Eleanor's public acknowledgement of her past transformed her from feared matriarch to respected advocate. Her testimony before the city council about her own experience as a teenage mother in the shelter led to increased funding for women's support services citywide. Robert found himself in an unexpected position, not as CEO but as part of a community leadership team where his voice was equal to, not above, others. The business skills he'd once used for profit now served a different purpose, helping residents develop sustainable independence. The most profound shift came in the quiet moments. The shelter's evening gatherings now included corporate volunteers alongside residents, sharing meals and stories without distinction. Children from different backgrounds played together in the newly renovated playground, while their parents discovered common ground in their hopes and struggles. Martha would love this, Sarah said softly, watching the community flourish. She always knew the shelter wasn't just about providing refuge, it was about creating change. As the sun set on another transformative day, Robert and Lila stood in the doorway of their small room, now part of an expanded family housing section. Mia slept peacefully in her crib, surrounded by the love of an entire community. Power isn't what we thought it was, Robert reflected, his arm around Lila's waist. It's not in the boardroom or the bank account. It's here, in the lives we touch, in the changes we make together. Trust, like a delicate tapestry, had to be rewoven thread by thread. For Robert and Lila, the process began in the small moments shared in their shelter routine, each day adding another strand to their fragile reconnection. I used to think trust was about control, Robert admitted one morning, as they worked together preparing breakfast for the shelter residents. Now I realize it's about letting go. Their journey of rebuilding started with Mia's daily care. Each diaper change, each feeding, each midnight crying session became an opportunity to prove reliability and commitment. Lila watched as Robert, once consumed by board meetings and profit margins, learned to prioritize their daughter's smallest needs. It's strange, she confided to Sarah during a quiet moment. I trust him with Mia completely now, but trusting him with my heart again, that's harder. The shelter's community became witnesses to their slow dance of reconciliation. They noticed how Robert no longer checked his phone during community meetings, how he remembered each resident's story, how he showed up consistently without fanfare or expectation. Eleanor's presence added another layer of complexity. Her attempts to rebuild trust with both her son and daughter-in-law were met with cautious acceptance. She started small, bringing coffee for the morning shifts, helping with paperwork, listening more than speaking. Trust isn't earned in grand gestures, Martha had written in her journal, which became their unofficial guide. It's built in the moments when no one's watching, in the promises kept when keeping them is hard. The breakthrough came during a crisis with one of the shelter's teenage residents. Amy, 16 and pregnant, faced the same choice Eleanor had decades ago. This time, Eleanor stepped forward not with judgment, but with understanding. I made the wrong choice because I was afraid, she told Amy, as Robert and Lila listened from the doorway. But fear shouldn't decide your future. Let us help you find a different way. Watching his mother's transformation helped Robert understand his own journey. He saw how trust required not just change but consistency, not just words but sustained action. Lila found herself opening up gradually, sharing not just the responsibilities of parenting but the dreams she'd kept guarded. I want to start a proper education program here, she told Robert one evening. Not just for the children but for the parents too. Instead of immediately offering funding or taking control, Robert simply asked, "Tell me more about your vision." It was a small moment, but it marked a profound shift in their dynamic. The shelter's daily routines became their training ground for rebuilt trust. They learned to coordinate without controlling, to support without smothering, to love without demanding. Each small success, a jointly handled crisis, a synchronized bedtime routine, a shared silence that felt comfortable rather than tense, added another layer of confidence in their future. "Look how far you've come," Sarah observed, watching them work seamlessly together during a community event. "You're not just coexisting anymore, you're partnering." The most powerful testament to their rebuilding came not in words but in reflexes. When Mia took her first steps, they both instinctively reached out to catch her, their hands meeting in the middle. Neither pulled away. The healing spread like ripples in a pond, touching not just Robert and Lila, but everyone in their expanding circle. The shelter became a crucible for transformation, where broken relationships found new ways to mend. Eleanor's journey from ruthless matriarch to vulnerable grandmother unfolded in tender moments. She began spending afternoons in the shelter's nursery, rocking Mia and other babies, perhaps trying to heal her own decades-old wound of giving up her child. "I never let myself feel this before," she confessed to Lila one day as Mia played with her pearl necklace. The joy of simply holding a baby, of being present without agenda or expectation. Robert found himself rebuilding connections with former business associates, but on different terms. James, who had stood by him through the transformation, helped establish a mentorship program matching corporate executives with shelter residents seeking career guidance. "We're not just changing lives," James observed, "we're changing how business defines success." The shelter residents witnessed this evolution with a mixture of skepticism and hope. They watched as the Anderson family learned to navigate their new reality, stumbling sometimes but always getting back up. "It's like watching a butterfly emerge," Claire commented to Sarah. "Messy and beautiful all at once." The most profound healing happened in the quiet moments. Robert and Lila began taking evening walks with Mia, their conversations moving beyond practical co-parenting to deeper waters of dreams and fears. "I used to think love was about grand gestures," Robert said one evening as they watched the sunset from the shelter's roof garden. "Now I understand it's about showing up every day, especially when it's hard." Eleanor's relationship with the shelter community evolved from benefactor to member. She started teaching a weekly class on financial literacy, sharing not just her business knowledge, but the hard-earned wisdom of her mistakes. The healing touched the next generation too. Mia, growing up surrounded by love from all sides, showed none of the scars of her parents' earlier struggles. She moved seamlessly between her father's reformed corporate world and her mother's nurturing shelter community. Sometimes broken things heal stronger in the broken places, Sarah reflected, watching the family's transformation. Martha taught us that. The transformation crystallized on a quiet Sunday afternoon during the shelter's weekly community dinner. Robert, wearing an apron and serving food alongside Tom, caught Lila's eye across the room, and they shared a moment of profound recognition. "We're not who we were," she told him later that night, as they sat in the shelter's small garden. "And maybe that's the point. We had to lose who we thought we were to become who we needed to be." Their new understanding went beyond personal growth. They began to see the shelter not as a temporary refuge, but as a model for community healing. Each resident's story contributed to a larger tapestry of human resilience and connection. Eleanor, watching her son serve meals to people she once would have ignored, found her own epiphany. Power isn't about control, she reflected during a foundation meeting. It's about empowerment. Richard knew that all along. The shelter's residents, too, gained new understanding of their own worth. Emma, now holding her newborn son, no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance, but as a survivor with wisdom to share. Jessica's medical knowledge became more valued than any prestigious hospital credential. "We're not just housing people," Sarah observed. "We're rebuilding humanity, one relationship at a time." The most profound understanding came in their view of family. Blood ties mattered less than chosen bonds. The shelter's mix of ages, backgrounds, and experiences created a tapestry of support that traditional family structures couldn't match. Robert discovered that true leadership meant serving rather than commanding. His corporate skills found new purpose in grant writing and program development, always guided by the community's needs rather than his own vision. "Martha would say we've finally learned to see with our hearts instead of our eyes," Claire remarked, watching the evening unfold, and she'd be right. Mia, toddling between various loving arms, embodied this new understanding. She saw no distinction between her grandmother's pearls and Jessica's worn scrubs, between corporate executives and shelter residents. In her innocent wisdom, she showed them all what truly mattered. "We thought we were saving this place," Lila said to Robert as they put Mia to bed. "But really, it saved us." The final test came without warning on a crisp autumn morning. A group of developers, backed by powerful city officials, announced plans for a luxury high-rise complex that would require demolishing not just St. Mary's, but the entire neighborhood of affordable housing. "They're offering triple the market value," James reported grimly during an emergency meeting. "Most of the local property owners are already signing contracts." The threat was more insidious than Eleanor's previous attempts at gentrification. This time they faced not just money but political power. The mayor himself championed the project as urban renewal, promising jobs and economic growth. "They're trying to erase us," Tom said bitterly, studying the glossy development plans. "Not just the shelter, but everyone who doesn't fit their vision of progress." Robert and Lila found themselves leading an unlikely coalition. Shelter residents joined forces with local business owners, community activists, and even some of Robert's former corporate allies who had witnessed his transformation. "We're not fighting for a building," Lila declared during a community rally. "We're fighting for the soul of our city." Eleanor, in a final act of redemption, leveraged her social connections to expose the corruption behind the development plan. She hosted tea parties for influential society wives, sharing not just Martha's story but her own journey from power to purpose. "I spent years helping destroy communities like this," she told them. "Now I understand what my husband always knew: a city's wealth isn't in its skyline but in its people." The decisive moment came when Emma went into labor during a crucial city council meeting. The developers had scheduled the vote strategically, hoping to prevent shelter residents from attending. Instead, they created a powerful symbol. "Go, Sarah," urged Robert and Lila, who were scheduled to speak. "Show them exactly what we're fighting for." The council chamber fell silent as shelter residents filed in, led by Jessica carrying her medical bag. They set up a makeshift birthing space right there, turning sterile bureaucracy into raw humanity. Emma's son was born as the council debated their future, his first cries echoing through the marble halls. "This is who you're voting to displace," Robert told the council, his voice firm. "Not statistics, not obstacles to progress. Real people, real lives, real community." Lila held Mia up to the podium. "My daughter learned to walk in St. Mary's halls. She took her first step surrounded by love from every race, class, and background. That's the future we should be building." The developers fought back with promises of tax revenue and luxury amenities, but they couldn't fight the image of Emma nursing her newborn in the council chamber, or the sight of elderly residents sharing their stories of finding hope at St. Mary's. "Martha always said that love is the most powerful force for change," Sarah reminded them all. "Today we prove her right." The city council's decision came at dawn after an all-night session. St. Mary's would not only be preserved but designated as a historical landmark protected for future generations. The victory, however, was just the beginning of a larger transformation. "We're not just saving a building," Robert announced at the celebration gathering. "We're creating a model for what community can be." The Martha Watson Foundation unveiled plans to expand the shelter's programs into a comprehensive community center. But Eleanor, standing beside her son, revealed the final piece of their vision. "The Anderson Corporation is restructuring," she declared. 50% of our profits will now fund similar centers across the city. It's time to honor Richard's legacy properly." The transformation rippled outward. Local businesses that had supported their fight became partners in job training programs. Corporate executives who had witnessed the shelter's power began similar initiatives in their own companies. The city's approach to housing and poverty shifted from containment to engagement. Lila's education program became a cornerstone of the new center. "Every parent here has dreamed," she explained to a group of visiting officials. "We're not just providing shelter, we're building futures." The program combined childcare, adult education, and career training, allowing parents to break the cycle of poverty. The shelter's residents played key roles in the transformation. Emma's birthing story became a symbol of community resilience, leading to the creation of an on-site maternal health clinic. Jessica headed the medical program, while Tom's maintenance expertise shaped the building's renovation plans. "Martha always said true change happens from the inside out," Sarah reflected, watching the community center take shape. She would be proud to see her family growing like this. Robert and Lila's relationship evolved alongside the center. Their small shelter room expanded into a modest apartment within the building, choosing to remain part of the community they'd helped save. Their wedding, held in the shelter's renovated garden, celebrated not just their love but the power of second chances. Eleanor found her own peace, establishing a counseling program for young mothers facing the choices she had once confronted alone. "Every woman deserves the chance to write her own story," she told her first group of clients, her voice thick with understanding. The most profound transformation was visible in the everyday moments: corporate volunteers sharing meals with residents, children from different backgrounds playing together in the new playground, elderly residents teaching traditional crafts to young parents. "But we didn't just save a shelter," Robert told Lila as they watched Mia play with Emma's son. "We created a blueprint for what society could be." 1 year later, on the anniversary of Martha's passing, the community gathered in the shelter's garden, now a flourishing space named in her honor. The rocking chair that had been her favorite spot held a place of honor, draped with her last unfinished knitting project. "Martha always said that love has a way of completing unfinished stories," Sarah addressed the gathered crowd. "Look around you, her story lives on in each of us." The Martha Watson Community Center had become a model for social change. 6 similar centers had opened across the city, each adapting the St. Mary's blueprint to their local needs. Eleanor, now a regular fixture in the daycare center, often marveled at how her grandchildren Mia and the other shelter children played together without the barriers she'd once thought essential. "My mother's pearls," she laughed one day, watching Mia and Emma's son trade plastic beads, seem less important now. Robert and Lila found their rhythm in this new life. They still lived in their apartment at the center, though they could afford any mansion in the city. Some things are worth more than luxury, Robert would say, watching sunset community dinners from their modest balcony. The center's success attracted attention from around the country. Social workers, city planners, and corporate leaders came to study their model of integrated community support. But the true magic lay in the small moments: Tom teaching teenage residents basic maintenance skills, Jessica running health workshops for new mothers, Claire's adult education classes filled with determined learners. "We're not just changing lives," Lila observed during a teacher training session. "We're changing how people see themselves." The Anderson Corporation, under its new structure, became a case study in corporate responsibility. Other companies began following their lead, creating a ripple effect of social change throughout the business world. On this anniversary evening, as children played in the garden and residents shared a communal meal, Robert found himself sitting in Martha's rocking chair. Mia climbed into his lap, her small hand reaching for Lila as she passed by. "Martha knew," he said softly. "She knew that real wealth isn't in what we own, but in what we share." The future stretched before them, not as a corporate empire but as a growing community of hope. The shelter's walls, once symbols of last resort, now stood as testament to the power of love, second chances, and the unshakable strength of chosen family. Sometimes Eleanor told a group of young mothers, her eyes misting as she watched her son and daughter-in-law, "Our greatest mistakes lead us to our truest purpose." As night fell over St. Mary's, the garden lights twinkled like stars. The community gathered for their evening tradition, sharing stories in Martha's garden. Her empty rocking chair creaked gently in the breeze, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful presence is found in what we build after loss. The story of St. Mary's continued to unfold, not as a fairy tale of rescue, but as a living testament to the power of community, the strength of love, and the endless possibility of transformation. What did you think about Robert and Lila's journey? We'd love to hear your perspective on second chances, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. Have you ever experienced a moment where losing everything helped you find what really matters? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire others facing similar challenges. If you want to experience more meaningful stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, we bring you powerful narratives that remind us of the strength of the human spirit and the power of community. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late for transformation. Your share could be the light someone needs during their darkest moment. Together, we can spread hope and inspire positive change in our communities. Remember, the greatest wealth isn't found in bank accounts, it's found in the connections we build and the lives we touch. See you in our next story.